Um, I will take a quick second. I'm the Advocacy Director of Voices for Georgia's Children, which means I work on child policy and lobby at the state and federal levels. Um, I'd like to start off today with a little animation that we made at Voices to explain levels of government. It's sort of Georgia centric, but it covers the whole United States, and it might just give you and I've done a number of international trips and stuff, political trips. So it might give you an idea just of how to start thinking about the buckets of policy. So I'd like to spend a few minutes and show you this video, and then we'll dive right into the slides. So if that's okay, Carrie, if you want to go ahead and hit play, I will mute.
In case you hadn't noticed, the United States of America is a big country, and Georgia is a big state inside this big country. Sometimes running big things like the United States and the big things inside of the big things like Georgia can be a little confusing. But we're here to help, so sit back, kick off your shoes, and when we are all done here, we hope it won't seem confusing at all. Government surrounds us at all levels. It can be local, like your neighborhood planning unit, or even bigger, like your city council or school board. Bigger still, like state government, and then humongous, like the entire country. But while all of these levels have different, overlapping boundaries, they all work together to serve you. Today, we're going to focus on the top two levels, federal and state. Here's how it works. I'm sure you've heard of the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, that together are designed to provide checks and balances on each other, basically to make sure that no one branch becomes too powerful. This three-branch concept is implemented in one way or another at pretty much every level of government. The first level, the federal level, makes laws and rules for the whole country. This includes things like coining money, interstate highways, foreign policy, laws regulating and overseeing large national initiatives in things like education, federal policy for public benefits, crime, and health. One of the main things the federal government does is it makes lots and lots of decisions about how to dole out federal tax dollars to other levels of government and programs. Much of the decision-making at the federal level takes place in Washington, D.C., and much of it takes place on or near Capitol Hill. The legislative branch is comprised of two chambers: the United States Senate, which is overseen by the Vice President, and the United States House of Representatives, which is overseen by the Speaker of the House. Together, they are referred to as Congress. In Washington, D.C., Georgia is represented by 2 United States senators, like every other state in the country, and 14 congressional representatives. The senators each represent the entire state. The congressmen or women each represent a district containing about 700,000 people. That means that each citizen has 2 United States senators and 1 congressman representing them in Washington, D.C. Congress is considered a full-time legislature because they work throughout the year. At the federal level, any bills or budgets passed by both the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives must be signed by the President of the United States in order to become law. The second level of government is the state level. States make laws and rulings for the people in their state. These policies are similar to the federal ones, but are more narrow and focused on the particular needs of the people in the state, and the process can differ from state to state. This includes things like policies for hospitals, state transportation, education, implementation of public benefits, and crime. The state gets to make decisions about how to spend state tax dollars. One thing to know here is that when federal and state laws conflict, federal law always overrides the state law, just like state law overrides local law. At the state level, here in Georgia, much of the decision-making takes place at or near the state capitol. State transportation, education, implementation of public benefits, and crime. The state gets to make decisions about how to spend state tax dollars. One thing to know here is that when federal and state laws conflict, federal law always overrides the state law, just like state law overrides local law. At the state level, here in Georgia, much of the decision-making takes place at or near the state capitol in Atlanta, affectionately referred to as the Gold Dome. The governor is the head of the executive branch, and our legislative branch is comprised of two chambers: the State Senate, which is overseen by the Lieutenant Governor, and the House of Representatives, which is overseen by the Georgia Speaker of the House. Together, these bodies are referred to as the General Assembly. The State Senate has 56 members representing districts with populations of about 173,000 each. The House has 180 members, and each of them represents districts with a little under 54,000 residents each. Our state lawmakers are in legislative session about 3 to 4 months at the beginning of each year, and so are considered a part-time legislature. At this level, for a bill to become a law, it must be passed by both the Senate and the House and then signed by the governor, or remain unsigned for 40 days, in which case it becomes law automatically. The only state bill that is required to be passed each year is a balanced state budget. The rest are gravy. So that about covers it. Now you can put your shoes back on, maybe feel a little more knowledgeable, and have a great day. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so that web buffering aside is sort of the kickoff to any kind of advocacy, is understanding the levels that you're dealing with, and so that you know what to advocate for at what level. And I just usually show that because a lot of grownups, and myself included, before I got into advocacy, needed a refresher on government. So I was trying to start off my talks that way. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to see if I need to open my chat so I can see everybody's questions. I can't figure out how to do that. Anyway, so as you saw in the video, public policy really covers laws, regulations, actions of government, like executive orders, which we've seen a lot of the last few years, and funding priorities. And all of these things weave together to sort of cover well-being. And I'm going to sort of burn through some of these and get to the juicier part of this presentation. Let's go to the next slide, please. This particular slide, though, is important. So when people make policies, there's a sort of pathway that they take to get the policies made. The first thing, of course, is identifying a problem. I will give you an example in a second. The second one is the policy that you think is going to solve that problem. And then, of course, you see. Then a lot of these other ones get forgotten. You need to make sure there's funding for it. So even just passing a law, if it's unfunded, it becomes an unfunded mandate, and it just can sit there and not have anything happen. Once it's funded and up and running, and it needs to get implemented and get implemented well. So you have to keep, as an advocate, it's important to know you have to keep advocating after you've passed your bill or after you've gotten the money to make sure that it gets implemented well. And then if it doesn't get implemented well, you need to enforce, you need to have some sort of mechanism to enforce a repair or to get it to be implemented. And then, like all good sciencey and data-driven kind of people, it's great to evaluate the policy after it's been up and running for a minute so that you can see if you need to go back and alter it in any way. And Carrie, I'm just going to count on you. If people have questions as we go, I'm going to let you shoot me a note or unmute folks.
Sounds great. I'm monitoring the chat. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you. You've already seen this pretty much in that little video, but these are just, I put all of this stuff in here so you can have it later, but these are the lists of folks that you can lobby to and advocate to. Next slide, please. And then these are agencies, at least in our state, and most states have agencies like these that you can advocate to the agency directly. If you haven't done that before, It's really handy to know who your commissioners are, and you can send letters and actually arrange meetings with these people. They're very usually state by state. I've found them to be very accessible. And a lot of folks in federal agencies are also likewise accessible. You just have to make sure you get an email address or reach out and a call. And it's surprising our government is so easy to get to when you decide you want to get to it. You can just ping through these slowly, Carrie. These are just a list of our agencies in Georgia. So, as I just said, there are a lot of places you can ask. You can advocate at all of these places, your state capital, the United States Capitol, agencies, federal agencies, local government, and what's more, community leaders like neighborhood associations and things. You can, those are all viable advocating places. Next one, please. All right, so asking, a lot of people feel really intimidated about when they can advocate, when they can ask for what they want. And really, you can ask anytime, right? Legislative sessions are good when they're in session because everybody's all together and voting on things. However, it's also a time when a lot of people are talking about a lot of things to them and they may be distracted by, say, I do children's issues, so it's not uncommon for me to have something that's really pressing for me, and I go to the State House during the legislative session and there'll be some big transportation bill going on and their bandwidth is taken up, by trying to absorb that and forestry and healthcare and whatever else is going on at the time. But that's one way to get them all in one place, all the lawmakers. Between sessions is usually a really great time when they are home in district or when they're having study committee sort of external meetings about policy is good. You can also make an appointment. I have run into people in grocery stores and in restrooms and in, Home Depots and all kinds of places. And I always try to keep, my wits about me when that happens so that if a conversation does happen to strike up, I know I have my one thing that I want to ask them for. And then, of course, just asking people who know people is, is handy. Next slide, please. I'm kind of going really fast because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. Things that are important to be aware of. So policymakers' interests, it's great to find somebody who's elected or who is appointed who has the same interests as you're trying to get done. So we have champions for children who say, what have you got for me? What can I do? Of course, a crisis, and we've had a few of those this year, just saying people make change, a lot of policy change in the middle of crises. And it's unfortunate, but that's how it goes. It's human nature. Also, if you find somebody who's legislating something that is similar to what you are interested in doing, it's good to kind of approach those folks and say, hey, I know you've got this going on over here, but this is akin to it. Would you be interested in helping us with this now or following your work? And then, of course, voter climate, polling data can be very influential, or new information. We've watched a lot of policy get changed, even this year with information as we learn more and more about the coronavirus, for example, but other kinds of scientific data or behavior data can change people's likeliness to take on an issue. Next slide, please. All right, so we already went through some of this in this. I wanted this in here in case you guys want this PowerPoint of basically how a bill becomes a law, and it's pretty universal. This is Georgia specific, however, it works on 95% of the time at federal and state level. As it gets introduced, it gets assigned to a committee in that chamber, whether it's Senate or House. It gets vetted in committee. Sometimes it goes to a subcommittee and then back to committee. If it makes it out of committee, if it is recommended to pass out of committee, then it goes on to the Rules Committee. Now, this is important. So the Rules Committee is the committee that decides at a state level what goes to the floor for a vote by the full chamber. And there are other procedures at the federal level that are similar, but not every bill that gets out there gets a vote. So let's just start with that information. But the Rules Committee can decide which ones are going to get a vote by the full body. And if it gets out of rules, so you have to lobby all these little committees and also the Rules Committee. And if it gets out of there, then it goes to the full body, like the House or the Senate. They'll vote on it, and then it'll go to the next chamber and start all over again. So that's just sort of, I'm kind of burning through this. And then if it gets through both chambers and House and Senate, and it goes to the executive branch, then the government or let it let it signature. Next slide, please. Okay, so here, this is the stuff that to me is one of the most interesting pieces. Advocacy is one of these things where a lot of times people think that they have to do everything, that they have, like, let's advocate on human trafficking. Okay, so I'm going to have the meetings, and I'm going to go to the Capitol, and I'm going to do grassroots, and I'm going to, give money to it, and I'm going to do all these things. And that's pretty impossible for most people to pull off all of that. And I do this for a living, and it's still impossible for me to pull off all of that. So the first thing, if you want to advocate on anything, is to know what is your role. What are you best at? Are you a subject matter expert? Are you a legislative expert? Do you have lived experience that you need to share? And I'll tell you that lived experience is the number one most important thing to share with people, followed closely by subject matter expertise. Lawmakers really value that, and they tend to listen to that more. How far are you willing to go for change? So you're going to give up a day of work? Do you need to have childcare for your kids so you can go lobby? Are you able to send a few emails? What part can you play, and be realistic about it, so that A, you can feel good about your work, and B, other people aren't counting on you to do things that you simply can't achieve. And these limits, it's just basically the same thing. Next slide, please. And what would you like to see? A lot of people come into advocacy, and I did when I started in advocacy. I was like, it's just broken. I'm so frustrated with the Department of Family and Children's Services, or I'm so frustrated with, the fact that we have child prostitutes. I'm so frustrated. Well, what would you like to see happen? Like, okay, so it doesn't work. Like, get specific, do some analysis, and think hard, and talk to people who work in the space, and see where you can find advantage, and narrow down your target of what you want to achieve. It's best if you can narrow it down to like a sentence or two. That's always the best, is if you can say it in a sentence or two, people can understand it, get their heads around it, and move on. And once you've done that, it's good to think hard about who is going to be in your way, who's going to oppose what you want to do, and why would they oppose it? And can you come to a consensus with your worst enemy, or even your moderate enemy, on how to fix something? Usually people agree on the problem. They don't usually agree on how to solve it. So thinking hard about how to come to compromise is usually the most, I find it one of the most meaningful parts of advocacy. And then what other challenges are there? Is there enough money? Is there no money? We're in a recession right now. So solving a problem with money in Georgia, probably not a good idea, because we don't have as much because of the COVID-19 issue. Next slide, please. Set your goal. Like I said, get it down to one statement, and have a fallback plan in case something doesn't work. Can you get some kind of win out of it? And really try and use data. Really try and use reliable data, because people find it hard to argue with that. Next slide, please. And lobby at the right place. Like, if you're worried about like CARES funding, for instance, which is some of the stimulus money coming down from our federal government, and you just want to get the money to come down to the state, don't lobby at the state level, because the state doesn't control that money coming down. They can ask for it, but they don't control it. Lobby at the federal level. However, if you want to see how that money is spent, lobby at the state level, because that's where the money's going to end up. And who is your target audience? Always important to think about your audience. Do you need other voters to help you sway people? And this is mostly a communication thing. How do you want to wrap up your message, so that the next phase of advocacy, the person or the group can take it and run with it, whether it's a lawmaker or an advocacy group or your neighbor. Next slide, please. And then if you feel like you can't do it, like you can't get off work, or you're not the right person, or you don't know somebody, who else can you bring into your team to influence the people who are controlling policy? Sometimes agency heads are interested, or agency workers have the data that you need. Sometimes other elected officials can sway their friends. And sometimes it's other voters or business businesses are a great resource to sway opinion of policymakers. Next one, please. Again, as I said earlier, define your audience. You've got the people who agree with you, you've got the people who don't agree with you, and then you've got those folks in the middle. And how can you best spend your advocacy, and what do you need to do to get your issue across the finish line? Or for some of us, what do you need to do to kill an issue, to kill a bill that you don't like? Next slide, please. This is a define your audience. You can talk directly to them, or you can talk to their staffs. You can go to the courts, you can litigate something. That's surprisingly enough a form of advocacy. And you can get coalitions together. Next slide, please. Okay, so your audience, once you figure out who you're talking to and what you want them to do, what do they already know? You don't want to be insulting, but you also don't want to leave them hanging with a big gap of information. What do you want them to know? Which usually gets back to that one or two sentence pitch that you have about your issue. Why should they care? That's a big one. Like, why should I care? Like, what is, like, a lot of times I'll say, well, in my head, I'm like, I can't believe they don't care about this. Well, why should they? Like, can I convince them to care? Or are they just not going to care, and I have to convince them to care about it for a whole different reason than I care about it? So for instance, I might care about children because it's important to me that our youth do well, and that we treat them with respect, and that we treat them in a trauma-informed way. Whereas for another policymaker, they may just care what it costs. Like, kids are fine and whatever, but it's not doesn't do anything for them. They may just care what it costs. Okay, so I will talk to them about what it costs and the money we're losing by not taking care of our kids. And also, what are people afraid of? This is a big one. People make a lot of policy, as I said, in crises. They make a lot of policy because they're afraid of things. They're somebody getting hurt, or somebody taking something away from them, or somebody ignoring them. I mean, there's a lot of things that people are afraid of. And similarly, there are things they're inspired by. So if you can think about those things as you advocate, sometimes you can get a touch with somebody and affect their decision-making by helping them be at ease with what you want them to do. It's basic psychology, I guess. The other thing is, don't expect people to be where you are. The best thing you can do is meet them where they are on an issue and help them move to where you want them to be. Don't expect them to make a big leap and get to where you are. It's just really, really important. Just meet them where they are and then help them go to where you want to be. And in doing that, it is not what you say to them. It is what they are hearing you say. And so there's certain buzzwords and things that are triggers for people. And it's really important, as you know your audience and you think about your audience and what they're afraid of, to not use language that is offensive to them or condescending to them, so that they can actually hear you when you're talking to them. Because a lot of folks and lawmakers are so busy, especially during session, they'll just shut down, like they feel insulted or condescended to or whatever. They can just shut down, or so a lot of times it's how you present your issue that is important. And to that end, think about what they're going to want. If librarians are out there, a bookmark seems like versus out there with your advocacy pitch on it might not be the right thing. You might want to, I don't know, use a tongue depressor, or you might want to wear your white coat. Like, think about how you're presenting your stuff. Next one, please. Relationship. It's really important. All the stuff I've been saying all the way up to now is how to build a relationship, where to go, who to talk to, all the little tips for talking to them. And trust. When you're advocating for things, it's important to remember that the people you're advocating to, we elect our peers, and they are not necessarily policy experts, or if they are, it's in one sector of their profession. So for instance, we elect many realtors because they know their communities, so they get elected, but they don't often know anything about child policy, or they don't know anything about medicine, or they don't know anything about trauma. And so it's important to have a relationship with them so that they can trust you when you talk to them, so they believe you, so they come to you for advice. And they love nothing better than to have a constituent in their district who has expertise in something or lived experience that they can go to and say, this bill came up, or I was thinking about this, or what should I do? And so to do that, it's important to make appointments with them when they're not, when they're home in district, or to make phone calls or to send emails with real information. They're not usually fans, I will be honest, they're not fans of petitions as much, or of like the bulk cut and dry, like the email where you just like put your name on it and they get 5,000 of the same exact language. They're onto that. And they know that somebody didn't try very hard. And so sometimes it's better to sort of personalize it if you have a second. Be patient. Change takes a ton of time. But it's not that people aren't trying. It's just that a lot of the mechanisms of government and policymaking are complex. And then data. That's the other thing I would have to say. I think is that my last slide? I think it is. Yes. So I burned through that. I don't know if you guys have any questions, or if you'd like for me to talk. I don't know how much time I have left either. Terry, how long do I have?
So we have about 10 minutes left. One thing that I did want to note in the chat is that someone shared that the experiences that you shared here today are very similar to things that they have seen in New Zealand. So I don't know if that person would be comfortable unmuting themselves or speaking a little bit more to that, but feel free to ask any questions for Polly in the chat, or if you feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you can also do that as well.
Let's see. I'm looking to see. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys some examples until somebody comes up with a question, and just interrupt me, Carrie. Of one of the earlier in the slides, and I was talking about the process. So in our state a few years ago, and this is about a thing that sort of went sideways halfway through the process of policymaking. So we realized that we didn't have any behavioral health, any money for behavioral health for kids birth to 4, which is a thing, right? So we, a lot of us advocated, a lot of different groups advocated to get this money in the budget for birth to 4 behavioral health. We all worked really hard. We got people on board. We used our relationships. We did all this stuff, and we got a few $1 million put in the state budget for what is called baby behavioral health. And then we felt like we were patting ourselves on the back. It was so great. And, now we can really help these kids at the most advantageous part of their lives. And a year later, you move on to other stuff. I was working on juvenile justice issues and working on, health insurance and all this other stuff. About a year and a half later, we were in a staff meeting, and somebody said, whatever happened to that money? Like, where is it? It went to this agency, but I haven't seen anything, And so then I was like, man, you're right. And I don't know. And so I started looking for the money, and we couldn't find it. And it made it in the budget. Like I read our budgets cover to cover every time, every issuance of a budget, I read it. And then we couldn't find it. And come to find out, it took us about 6 months to find that money. And it had been because we hadn't advocated past getting it in the budget, it had been parsed out to all of these already existing programs. So not that they didn't need it. Like, I'm not going to say that the autism program didn't need money or whatever, but we were all crestfallen because we had this other idea in mind that we didn't follow through on to see where that money went. So that's just an example of why it's important to stick with the follow-up, the implementation, the enforcement, and the evaluation. So we learned a big old lesson that day.
And someone shared in the chat that a key learning from them, from the things that you shared, is that it's not what you say, it's what they hear. And they recognize the opportunity to make sure that they use the right words moving forward.
Yeah, how important that is. The trust piece. And we all have our personal opinions about things. Like, even I lobby every day, and I have my personal me and then my work me. And, but I have grown as a my personal me has grown through my work because I learned that lesson about it's not what you say, it's what they hear. And if you can say it in a way that they can hear you, people will tell you all kinds of stuff if they trust you. They'll tell you more than you ever wanted to know if they trust you. But that is an opportunity to me. That is an opportunity, one, to build a stronger society because people are really communicating, and two, to make change because, like I said, people all agree. Like who, for instance, who is isn't is in support of human trafficking? Like nobody, like nobody. But when you get down to how to solve the problem, some people think that you should throw, kids who are prostituted in jail because that's what they know. That's all they've been exposed to think is like, well, we have to crack down on crime and we'll teach them a lesson, as opposed to some of us who are like more about the developmental aspects and the trauma that those children have suffered. And so we need to change our laws so we're not incarcerating kids to keep them safe or to change them, but we're actually treating their trauma in a non-punitive way. So, but it took a lot of conversations for a lot of years to bring folks in our state on board with that. And once they were on board, we had the far right and the far left and everybody in between on board with the therapeutic approach to this problem. But it took building a lot of trust and letting somebody like get right up in there and tell you the stuff that they're afraid of or what they think or what they grew up knowing. It's good for me, it's good for you, it's good for whatever. But when they start telling you that, then you can sort of think in your head, okay, how can I explain myself better? And how can I show them what I want them to see? So. But,
I want to also mention having patience to meet people where they are and taking them where you want them to be. So I guess a lot of people are just really recognizing that today's talk allows them to reflect on some of their actions and then how they can be more effective moving forward.
well, I can tell you, you can do it. You can do it. We asked, I'm trying to think where I was the other day where somebody said, oh, public safety, like, right, public safety stuff all over the country is a really hot topic. And it's hard to talk about with people because it gets right at a lot of those fears and those desires and a lot of historic racism. And there's all kinds of stuff loaded into public safety conversations, even more than usual right now, which I think is a good thing. But in that thing, it's the talk to somebody as if you were talking to your grandmother, right? Or your grandfather, and they come from a different time and a different place maybe, and they still care about you, or they still care about the stuff y'all were raised around, your culture, whatever. But the respect and the address to another human being, even if you heartily disagree with them, how you go about that can move mountains. No joke, it can move mountains.
Do you have any tips or suggestions? One person brought up about the challenge when data is not collected or available. What would be some ways to address that?
Okay, well, we run into that quite a bit. And our fallback is, well, then let's collect it. So maybe our ask, like we have because advocacy works and policy works in phases, right? It's rare to get what you want with your first question or with your first idea. Like usually you see the end, like you see the utopia at the end, and then you have to work it backwards and build up to that utopia a lot of times. And so if the data are not available, then maybe your ask needs to be, let's collect the data. You don't want to leave things linger. I think that there's a lot of people who make excuses to collect data when we really know that change really needs to happen. I would say that in terms of a lot of our systemic and institutional racism, there's data missing in a lot of that, but we know change needs to happen, right? So it's a balance. But if the data are not available and you don't think that you can get them in time, or you can't, or it's not convenient to push your ask back a year, then you have to kind of build a plane while you fly it. And what I would say is that's when lived experience is really important. And when a lot of times you can look at other similar states or similar countries, especially states. So if you're working in the United States, look at similar states of a similar population, a similar demographic, and a similar political party makeup, and see what other states have done that works and bring that along to your state. And at the federal level, I think that you can go upwards. You can take states, a few states, and move upwards to the federal level and say, this is working here, here, and here, and here, or this is not working here, 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 and here, and ask them to make change there. I hope that made sense.
And one last question before we go back to the main room. So someone asked if you have suggestions to appropriately engage lived experience without rewriting people's narratives. So similar to what you just said. And how do you engage stakeholders who are against this change?
I mean, that's, sometimes you just have to know you can't. You've got those folks on the other side. They're so far and they won't be moved. I do think, let's see, without rewriting people's narratives. So my preference, because here I am, like, I'll be honest, in case you can't tell from looking at me, I'm a middle-aged white woman, right? But I advocate on behalf of children of all colors and all makeups and all gender preferences and all that. And it's not my story, right? My story, I have a different story. Like, I have my own story, but that's not my story. But I think that that doesn't mean that I can't be on the team, right? It doesn't mean that I can't provide a forum for those kids to speak or for those parents to speak. It doesn't mean that I can't take their wishes and their needs and their struggles and use my relationships to help them build relationships, or use my relationships if there's not an opportunity. Say they're in South Georgia and I'm at the state capitol and I can't do Zoom or I can't do whatever, then I have to go to bat for them and hook them up with their like, or bat for them on an academic level, and make stuff happen. And I'm not a big fan of the storytelling advocacy from a third party perspective. But I'll just tell you really quick, original voice, if there's anything you can do to share original voice, that's the best. That's the most effective, because then it's not your voice, it's their voice. And what you've done is basically provide a venue. Does that help? I know I don't have 41 seconds to be helpful. But you guys can reach out to me. My contact information, I think, is on the slides, or Carrie can get it to you, and you can email me. We can keep talking, or I can send you whatever help I can. But your work is important, and thank you for having me on a Sunday.
Thank you so much, Polly, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. Everyone, please remember to return to the main room by pressing Leave Breakout Room. We'll have one more breakout session for call to action, and then we will be doing our drawings for our training scholarships. So make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you stay here.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you again, Polly, so much. We appreciate you.
Bye.